He's talking about Eno's gonna need a huge satellite dish.
I remember seeing Justice League clearly. I was in college at the time and we decided we'd smoke a little bit of weed before watching, perhaps that'd make the film better. The film had a very troubled production, as we'll soon cover, and I couldn't fathom how the marriage of Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon's style would come together in a film that felt even remotely coherent. I remember sitting in a packed ultra screen at my local Marcus Cinema, absolutely and unequivocally bored. I thought it was absolutely horrible from the opening of the film. Back in 2007, George Miller's Justice League, which I mentioned a couple times in this video, started casting with Armie Hammer as Batman, DJ Cortana as Superman, Megan Gale as Wonder Woman, Common as Jon Stewart's Green Lantern, Adam Brody as Flash, and Jay Baruchel as Maxwell Lord. While the film had a lot of work done and cast and crew were being assembled, the 2008 writer's strike pushed back production 3 months, followed by production moving from Australia to Canada, due to issues with Warner Bros. Tax write-offs and stuff. Finally, the film would be axed due to the success of The Dark Knight. Perhaps, short-sightedly, DC thought solo movies were the future, so they axed Justice League. DJ Cortana and Adam Brody would both come back to DC for roles in Shazam as part of the Marvels family. George Miller also went on to direct Mad Max Fury Road, a career highlight for the director, so I guess it all kind of worked out in the end. Warner didn't leave the idea dead in the water for too long, as in 2014, after the success of Man of Steel, a new attempt would be made at making a new film based on the Super Team. The film started production in 2016, and Snyder would shoot most of the film. However, after the poor critical reception to Batman v Superman, Geoff Johns and John Berg would take over the role of creatively guiding the studio from Zack Snyder. The pair decided that the film needed rewrites and reshoots to make it more fun, so they brought in Joss Whedon and Alan Hinberg to watch the footage and help make it more fun. Around this time, Zack Snyder's daughter passed away and he stepped down from the project. Warner Bros. Went on to install Joss Whedon in his place, who was already working in the writing room to some extent. While the production of the movie was certainly rocky, we also had a fair share of controversies that went on during the filming, primarily from Joss Whedon, the new director installed after Zack Snyder left, who ultimately tanked his reputation on this film. Ray Fisher, who plays Cyborg in the film, came out and said that basically WB's camp, including Geoff Johns and Joss Whedon, did horrible acts of workplace misconduct. Fisher's co-stars mostly agreed when asked, but were more coy about it. However, this also brought to light claims from previous projects as well of him being a terrible person, including allegations from some people from Buffy and Firefly. In January 2022, Joss addressed the controversy by saying Gal Gadot didn't understand enough English and misunderstood what he said, and said that Ray Fisher was a bad actor and a liar. Joss Whedon has not directed a film since Justice League, and his show that he was launching at the time of the controversy, The Nevers, was quietly cancelled by HBO. Joss Whedon's name was also removed from the project of The Nevers, even though one season still came out. After the film's release, a fan outcry for the release of the Snyder Cut of Justice League began. This would also be the rise of Snyder's vocal fans on their many campaigns to see change in the world of DC and get Zack back to the helm of the universe again, and we'll talk about this more once we get to Zack Snyder's Justice League, however, and for now, we're gonna just kind of brush that under the rug. The story of Justice League is a direct follow-up to Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, taking place around a year after. Following the death of Superman, Parademon scouts began scouting the world for invasion by Darkseid and his champion Warlord Steppenwolf due to the world's fear of metahumans, and now lacking its ultimate champion, Superman. Batman finally decides it's necessary to assemble a team that he originally discovered in Lex Luthor's files during the events of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Meanwhile, Steppenwolf picks his first target of Themyscira, and he ends up victorious against the Amazon. This leads Hippolyta to launch a warning to Wonder Woman, signaling danger. Batman and Wonder Woman end up trying to recruit Aquaman, but Aquaman at first is hesitant to intervene with the affairs of man, feeling rejected by humans and not feeling at home in Atlantis either. He's kind of a man between worlds. Barry quickly joins Bruce, however, and shortly after this, Steppenwolf invades Atlantis and fights off some royal guards as well as Mira, and retrieves the Mother Box being held by Atlantis. Cyborg joins the team, and thanks to some intel from Commissioner Gordon, they learn Steppenwolf has an army in an abandoned facility that has several hostages from Star Labs. The team ends up going and getting into battle with Steppenwolf and his army, but Steppenwolf escapes and the team get trapped. Aquaman ends up swimming up and helps the team escape, convinced finally to join by Steppenwolf's assault on Atlantis. When the team regroups, they debate whether or not they should revive Superman, with the third mother box, which is the only one Steppenwolf doesn't have at this point. Feeling as though there is no option, the team moves ahead with the plan and manages to revive Superman. After being dead for about a year, Superman is confused and comes out angry, fighting the League and easily defeating its members before Lois arrives, which helps bring Superman back mentally, and the two fly off to the farm. Steppenwolf retrieves the last mother box in the confusion. Now, Steppenwolf can invade Earth with the power obtained through his 3 mother boxes, and he begins the process of terraforming Earth. This also happened in Man of Steel. This Earth should be pretty fucked up at this point. However, the League shows up and begins to fight the horde of parademons, but they simply can't stop the process without help from Superman, who shows up just in time after assuring Lois he would return but has to fight to save Earth. Superman ends up helping, and it's enough to stop Steppenwolf, and overcome with fear, Steppenwolf is attacked by his own parademons and sent back to Apocalypse. I guess parademons like sense fear, and Steppenwolf is really scared of Superman. Batman returns in this film and is definitely the primary lead of the film. He is overcome with guilt after the death of Superman, but due to the events of Batman vs. Superman, he has been inspired by Superman to be a better hero. I think the film definitely takes this idea and runs with it, and not fully in a good way. Batman is quipping, having fun, and just overall being an entirely different character to an annoying extent. Like, I thought the arc was fast in BVS, and I think even diehard Snyder fans have to concede to that. But this film, Batman doesn't even feel like the same character. It's not just the leap of logic that says he had a change of heart that felt a little fast. This character just wasn't written the same at all. Also, Ben Affleck isn't very good in this film, but I can't even blame him. He was brought in by Snyder's vision, flaws and all, and they locked him out of the editing room and eventually removed him from the project, with Joss Whedon, who had a totally different vision, taking over for Zack. I think at this point, the studio commandeered the project to the point where the cast lost a little bit of faith in the project. So while Affleck isn't great, he also wasn't put in a very good position at this point in the production, and just kinda had to see it through. Superman isn't in much of the film in reality, only appearing for the last 35 minutes, and I mean, Cavill seems to be putting in some effort on par with everyone else in this film at least. He no longer stands out as blatantly worse than the others in the cast, as I've commented on in the past. Superman's return did kind of have a hilarious evil Superman voice, which he uses for a few minutes that sounds really bad.
You won't let me live. You won't let me die.
And when he flies off to meet Lois Lane in the field, I wish I could say the reunion was special, but much like a lot of the film, it's undercut by cheesy jokes and crappy effects. We'll come back to the look of this film later. Superman doesn't have much of a goal throughout, except that he needs to save the world because he's Superman, and that's fine because he's Superman. The main issue I have is the lack of development on the character, leading to a generally boring revival, and his meeting with Lois and Martha was so rushed his return felt sloppy, and thus kinda hurts Batman v Superman even more, because as an audience member I question if his death was really worth it given the circumstances of the film. This is really no one's fault specifically. Again, it's down to Warner Bros. Zack wanted to kill Superman and further explore the consequences of that. Joss was stuck with the plot thread and WB wanted a shorter film. So there really wasn't time to expand on that plot or do everything they needed to in a single Justice League film. At least not one with a brisk 2-hour runtime for 6 major leads, a brand new villain who was intended to set up a larger threat. It just wasn't feasible given WB's restrictions and kind of the fact that we have conflicting filmmakers that wanted to do 2 totally different things with this film. Wonder Woman is probably the secondary lead. She has less to do than Batman, but is the other half of Batman trying to glue the team together. Gal Gadot is okay and her performance is fine, but the character still has some issues. For one, she constantly refers back to her long-dead lover, Steve Trevor. A mention wouldn't bother me, but the film kind of implies that Wonder Woman has done virtually nothing in the past 100 years up to the events of the film, except for mourn Steve Trevor. We, of course, with hindsight, know that's not true due to the events of Wonder Woman 1984, but it definitely makes the comments Batman made odd. It's also a side effect of the cinematic universe, especially ones that has prequels coming out following modern appearances of the character. Even beyond the cinematic universe, it is similar to some of the inconsistencies we see in films like the Star Wars prequels, which make some confusing moments for the original Star Wars films. Wonder Woman in the film clearly has to come to better accept the loss, something she learned from the death of Steve Trevor and other miscellaneous friends she made over the course of the past 100 years. So, when the debate on whether or not to revive Superman comes up, she opposes Batman's thinking of reviving him, claiming his time had come and it's too risky to bring him back to life. Ultimately, she was proven right for like one scene when he comes back evil, then he's back to be, well, good and chipper as ever. Cyborg even comments that you lose something when you die, and this leads to me questioning what the point of the debate or the comment was, because we don't really explore any long-term psychiatric trauma that may come about from the rebirth of Superman. Look at something like Shane Black's Iron Man 3. That whole film is about mental illness and depression, PTSD, and coping that may come from being a superhero.
How did you get out of the wormhole?
Wait a minute, Tony. What did you say? Tony.
Sorry.
As a result of saving the world, and also the things they see along the way that they can never forget. This is a topic that's rarely ever tackled, and while this film hinted that it may be something they'll tackle, they don't. So Wonder Woman's argument ended up being literally pointless, and that's kind of the most important thing she does in the movie. Flash also joined the team in his first major role in the DCEU after a cameo in Batman v Superman. In this film, Flash doesn't really act like Barry from the comics very much, acting more like Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory.
I am a snack hole.
I really don't love the character they created because he doesn't feel anything like Barry from the comics. Ezra Miller seems to be trying, even in the reshoots, but he's given such garbage material like everyone else that even with the effort, it doesn't really do much to endear me to the character. Anyhow, in this film, he optimistically joins the Justice League, given that at this point, he's still a rookie hero. While he's in the plot pretty thoroughly throughout the runtime, he still doesn't have much going on, and they never really bother to give him an arc. The Flash is just kind of there. I wish they did more with him, but at the same time, I'm happy they didn't, because I don't really like the direction they took the Flash in. He does meet with his dad, who's in jail wrongfully accused of killing his mother, and he does end up landing his first real job thanks to the help of Bruce at the end of the film, but it isn't enough to make him really work for me. Aquaman starts the film hesitant to help the League. He is a man of no nation, really, as Atlantis doesn't like his human half, and the people of land never did much for him either. Despite this, Aquaman eventually comes around once Atlantis is invaded, realizing that no one on Earth would be safe with Steppenwolf attempting to invade the planet. I think Aquaman has the best arc out of the film, but much like Superman, his arc kind of lacks the story depth needed to portray, since its runtime is so brisk. He shares the film with so many other characters. His arc isn't that deep, but there's a legitimate reason he's hesitant to join the League, and when he finally does, you can pretty easily understand why, since that while he's conflicted and a bit of a loner, it was the only way to protect both land and sea, despite his misgivings with both races. He also has an underlying compulsion to do good and find a place where he belongs. In a better film, they'd portray that more elegantly, but I think that's what they were going for. Momoa is not great again, in part because of the material, but you can also tell he tried his best to make the most of what he was given. Cyborg is also a character kind of lost after the death of his mother and transformation into a cyborg, after he merged with one of the mother cubes. He is constantly evolving and doesn't exactly know what's going on with himself. Again, he's a bit underutilized, but Ray Fisher clearly has a more important role in the early drafts, a lot of which seems to have been cut to hasten the pace of the film and hit the shorter runtime that WB wanted for the film. Ray Fisher seems to put some effort in as well, which is a bit surprising considering he didn't have the greatest time filming the movie, coming into conflict with Joss and corporate Warner Bros. Throughout the production. A lot of side characters, namely Lois Lane, Martha Kent, Alfred, and Commissioner Gordon, were all underutilized to the point that their appearances are virtually pointless. They also CGI'd Lois to have really bright red hair and a vibrant blue shirt throughout that looks out of place and frankly, really bad. J.K. Simmons is also here doing his best, but as much as I love him as J. Jonah Jameson, I don't really think he was the right choice for the more conflicted and nuanced Commissioner Gordon character, because frankly, I like seeing J.K. Simmons going kind of crazy as J. Jonah Jameson. Finally, let's talk about Steppenwolf, who's yet another poorly thought out, underestablished CGI villain. I certainly like him better than villains like Incubus or Doomsday from a design and even motivation standpoint, but I didn't love him either. Visually, while he is less threatening than the Snyderverse version of Steppenwolf, I think I may prefer the look of this one just because I felt the performance comes through a little better than Zack Snyder's version. That said, it's easier to buy that the other Steppenwolf could take on the whole Justice League. Regardless, we can talk about that again when we talk about the Snyder Cut. This film was shot by Fabian Wagner, who really hasn't shot that many films at all, and frankly, the film looks pretty bad. In part because while he's the credited cinematographer on both this and the Snyder Cut, this film was clearly shot in the gloomier Snyder style. Then, when the studio started making notes and Joss took over, it looks like they wanted something more akin to the Marvel's House style, which I think in a lot of ways started with Joss Whedon in the Avengers before advancing over time. They ended up recoloring the film, and with that digital coloring, it almost had the look of one of those films that were shot in black and white and then colorized later on a computer with Technicolor, like we saw with like King Kong back in the day and a lot of silent films. If Zack Snyder is to be believed, his ideal version of the film would have been black and white, hence the Justice League is gray recoloring of the Snyder Cut.
And that, by the way, that version of the movie is in black and white.
Ooh.
You know? Because when I had the movie myself, I turned it black. I had seen some advertising for Justice League, a billboard or something, and it made me turn the movie black and white.
Well, I think this is an immensely dumb idea on Zack's behalf, since why would you put 6 vibrant characters in black and white?
Please give Justice is Gray a shot. It's such a unique experience because, like I said, it's a 4-hour superhero team-up epic with Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Cyborg, The Flash, and Aquaman coming together in 4:3 aspect ratio and in black and white.
It may have affected the vision in filming the movie in the first place. Evidence of Zack's gloomier idea for the film can be seen in Wonder Woman's costume, which is much more faded, even in this cut, than we see in Jenkins' take on the character. Also, a lot of settings, like the abandoned buildings and war-torn climax, also lend to this gloomier reality the film was meant to follow. Regardless of that, Warner Bros. And Joss Whedon tried to make a darkly lit film brighten up the movie. They tried to take a darkly lit film and brighten up the colors. It just doesn't look good at all, and it's distracting on top of frankly being pretty ugly. I don't really love the look of Zack's films, but at least they're unique and look the way he intended very clearly. This film was shot to look one way and adjusted to look the opposite, and it makes the film look cheap. It makes it sort of hard to watch. That kind of leads into the issue of this film. Joss Whedon and Zack Snyder, while I dislike both to an extent, are almost entirely different filmmakers. They are literally the inverse of each other. The yin and yang of early 2010s comic book films. Two titans of the industry who are both uniquely weak filmmakers. They're such polar opposites that the idea that Joss Whedon finished a Zack Snyder's film is absolutely baffling to me. Like, why would they pick Joss Whedon of all people? I don't know, it's weird. Anyhow, continuing directly into the tone, which believe it or not is also pretty bad. This movie was basically scripted improv, at least the reshoots were. The whole film is loaded with quip after quip, joke after joke, which really doesn't work with these characters as established for Batman v Superman. On top of that, the jokes feel like they're created in a corporate lab by a room of probably 15 writers whose single goal was to make it sound like something funny the actors said on set to give it the impression that they were quirky and having fun making this film.
To your blade. Yeah. Something is definitely bleeding.
It doesn't work, first off, because Zack reimagined these characters as totally different entities that wouldn't say a lot of these jokes, and second, because the characters suck, and third, because the jokes suck, fourth, because the cast is also clearly miserable, spouting off this shitty dialogue while being roped into multi-week reshoots of a movie that when they left the project months earlier was a finished product. On top of that, you can tell a lot of these actors were brought into Zack's vision, and frankly, knew the true behind-the-scenes drama, which is that Zack was locked out of the editing room and replaced with Jeff Johns and Joss Whedon before Zack's daughter committed suicide, which was the public reason he left the film. With Zack's name attached, he either had to end up shouldering the blame for this movie that is blatantly not his vision, or he could leave the project. Warner could twist the story about Joss nobly stepping up to help Zack, and it's good publicity for the film. As cynical as it sounds, I think Warner Bros. Exploited the death of Zack's daughter as an excuse to remove him from the film, and clearly didn't take his vision into account. They wanted to change to a direction they saw as more commercially viable. It's kind of sad too, since Zack has clearly been affected by the loss of his daughter, supporting campaigns to help suicide prevention and putting little nuggets of information for suicide prevention in his own cut of the film, including billboards of the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention in his cut of Justice League. While I criticize Zack and his filmmaking, he also gives a lot back through his filmmaking, even making some cancer awareness PSAs long after becoming a major director, and you love to see that. Sadly, however, I think Warner Bros. Kind of did a dirty move on Zack, making devious PR decisions in an attempt to avoid criticism for creatively changing their line of DC films. They basically just exploited someone's death. They wanted to make a brighter, more quote-unquote fun films, and they saw a devious opportunity to achieve their goal and attempt to dodge criticism with the hope that Joss Whedon could turn around a film that was already pretty much done. It clearly did not pan out, because it's terrible. The Justice League was created in 1960's Brave and the Bold number 28 as a spiritual successor to the Justice Society, which was DC's first premier super team and featured many updated versions of the same members. We'll come back to the Justice Society when we get to their first cinematic appearance down the road. The original comics roster included some of its mainstay members that would go on to appear in this film. The original roster including Batman, Superman, The Flash, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Martian Manhunter, and Green Lantern, with Snapper Carr as an honorary member as a POV character for the audience. However, on New Earth, after the collapse of the multiverse, Black Canary was retconned into being a founding member of the Justice League, even suggesting the name of the Justice League to this new timeline. And she thought they should create a new name for the team rather than just copying the Justice Society name. This was again retcons post-Flashpoint, removing Black Canary from the original lineup and replacing Martian Manhunter with Cyborg. This is the version that the film is based off, with the film loosely following the League's formation to fight the forces of Apocalypse and Darkseid in that early New 52 run. The only membership change between the movie and the New 52 version is the removal of Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, in the three previous mainstream comic interpretations of the team. So it's a bit different than how the League was created, but the concept and lineup was pretty familiar to comic readers at the time. The Flash, or Barry Allen, is the second Flash and was created in Showcase number 4. However, Barry was a reboot of Jay Garrick, who was the original Flash, who first appeared in Flash Comics number 1. Showcase 4 is an important issue, as it's the issue that DC had really undergone its first silent reboot, moving away from its continuity of Earth 2 to Earth 1. That change would be further established in Flash 123, where Barry would meet Jay for the first time and establish that they lived in two separate worlds. The issue also established the multiverse for the first time in the history of comics, so it was extra important to the overall history of comics. However, though it was debated for a long time, lore experts agree More Fun Comics 101, or the first appearance of Clark Kent as Superboy, was the first true appearance of Earth 1, as the events that happened in the Superboy comic would continue on to be accepted as common Superman lore from there on. Any inconsistencies, of course, would be chalked up to the dimension switch in publication, as well as the side Earth, Earth 40, which certain lore-breaking issues got categorized into by DC historians. After Showcase number 4, however, pretty much everything took place on Earth 1, unless otherwise mentioned in a universe switch via Cosmic Treadmill or other such devices. It is worth noting, even issues of More Fun Comics, featuring Superboy stories that were categorized as Earth 1, had other stories in the same book that were categorized as Earth 2, which makes it oh so confusing for people determining what is canon to what world. between the years of 1945 and 1956 because everything kind of just quietly transitioned over and there was no real thought put into it until the Justice League and Justice Society started meeting up occasionally in the 1960s. Anyways, with that tangent over, Barry Allen is the speedster of the Justice League and is a competent scientist and works as a crime analyst. His origin is basically the same. His father was convicted of killing his mom and went to jail, with the Flash trying to prove his innocence, all while pining over his future wife, Iris West, who's the aunt of Wally West, who becomes his sidekick, Kid Flash, and eventually the third Flash after Barry's death during Crisis on Infinite Earths. Flash has more twists and turns to his story than most DC heroes, but the basic idea remains. The movie kind of takes Barry's attitude from the Justice League Unlimited version of the Flash, which is actually Wally West in that universe. He also kind of has the attitude of long-running sitcom character Sheldon Cooper of The Big Bang Theory. It's actually kind of a piss-poor adaptation of the character besides the very basic origin. Ezra Miller doesn't look anything like the Flash 2, which gives me double cognitive dissonance from the character, and I wouldn't so much mind the look or the change in direction, perhaps, if it wasn't for the fact that they're combined and this no longer in any way feels like the Flash that we know from the comics. Aquaman also has a really messy comic history, so let's go over it, okay? So the first Aquaman was created in More Fun Comics 73. He didn't have a secret identity and was just known as Aquaman, with him eventually taking over the identity of Mr. Waterman briefly. He also went to college. This version of Aquaman was retconned back into continuity as a different character entirely in 2023's The New Golden Age #1. Anyhow, eventually the character was rebooted in Adventure Comics 211, where he became Arthur Curry with the more familiar origin. This is the version we'd see in the film, however Aquaman is most based around his Peter David run, with him being more gruff, bigger, and has a nice scruffy beard. This is definitely the attitude that inspired Jason Momoa. Cyborg was primarily a member of the Teen Titans, first appearing in DC Comics Presents number 26 in 1980, and he was a major player in the Teen Titans comic line up until the New 52, where he's retconned out of ever having been in the Teen Titans and becoming a founding member of the Justice League instead, because DC wanted their own version of Iron Man on the Justice League. Victor Stone became a street criminal after his parents did inhumane intelligence experiments on him. One day, while visiting his parents at Star Labs, where they worked, Victor was mutilated by a blob creature that killed his mom. His father reconstructed him with enhanced technology, and he became the Cyborg, eventually joining the Teen Titans. In the New 52, his origin was nudged a little bit. It was similar, but this time Cyborg was a high school athlete who was harmed in an explosion of a father box by Star Labs, and his father, a scientist there, turned him into Cyborg and he joined the Justice League. In the films, the origins are kind of merged, with his mother again dying in the accident that maimed him. This time he was merged with a mother box instead of a father box, and he became Cyborg and joined the Justice League. No matter what it was, it's evident with the reboot of the comics and the film version they wanted to distance Cyborg from his original purpose as a member of the Teen Titans and make him a full-time member of the Justice League, which I think weakens the character, especially when you consider how much interpersonal relationships were erased when moving him from the Titans to the Justice League. Victor never really found his place on the Justice League in either iteration either, with him kind of being an on and off member. And I never really saw Victor finding his place either. He doesn't really pal around with the other Justice League characters outside of their particular comic runs. Unlike some of the Justice League members like Batman and Superman, who occasionally team up, or Batman and Wonder Woman. I don't know. Steppenwolf was created in New Gods #7 and is a herald of Darkseid, and was originally the uncle of Darkseid before just becoming part of his inner circle in the more recent iterations. He acts as the main villain of Justice League, with the intention of him leading the first wave before Darkseid arrives as the ultimate threat later on. Deathstroke first appeared in New Teen Titans #2 and acted as the main villain to the Teen Titans before expanding to be one of the biggest adversaries in the DC universe overall. He briefly appeared in the credits of the film. We don't know much about what this DCEU counterpart would have been, but we will come back to this very soon, so hold up a bit. The music in this film is also quite bad for the most part. Unlike the rival Avengers, the Justice League didn't get an epic film score they probably deserved. Instead, the film leans heavily into covers of classic rock songs, including Sigrid's cover of Everybody Knows by Leonard Cohen and Come Together by the Beatles. We also have a new reprise on the shitty Wonder Woman score, with at one point an orchestra playing the shitty riff. Danny Elfman composed the film, and while the classic film composer worked on the memorable 1989 Batman score, he wasn't a great choice for this film, evidently, as he didn't make a single memorable piece of music that plays throughout this 2-hour runtime. And turning their back on Hans Zimmer, who did the first couple films in the trilogy and made some decent scores, at least for Man of Steel. So I don't know why they did it. The film is also edited like total dog shit, with a breakneck pace in a movie that was much longer by design. I know the Snyder Cut is well over 3 hours, but even so, this film was probably intended to be at least 45 minutes longer, and it shows in the editing with this film, which feels like a prolonged 2-hour abridged version of a longer movie. Ironically, that's kind of what it became with the Snyder Cut being out today. This film had 3 credited editors, and it shows. Another shred of evidence that the film is a total fucking disaster. The editors were David Brenner, who worked with Zack Snyder, James Mangold, James Cameron, and Oliver Stone multiple times each, and likely was the original editor, as he returned for the actual Snyder Cut. I assume he was mainly credited for previous work he'd done on the film more than the final cut, if I had to take a stab at it. Richard Pearson was added, who edited some later DC films as well as several MonsterVerse films, and I suspect was installed to the film by Warner Bros., who he seems to basically be a studio editor for. And finally, Martin Walsh, who won the Oscar for Best Editing for his work on Chicago in 2002, and of course also edited Wonder Woman, and was probably put onto the project by Warner Brothers after they were replacing Zack, seeing that Wonder Woman was a pretty good critical success. The film has 2 end credit scenes, both play after a non-flashy credit sequence. We have one which is fairly unimportant, but cute I guess. The Flash challenges Superman to a race. They do a race, but we never see who wins. Who cares? It is a cute homage to the comics, which would frequently see Batman and Superman race, but whatever. The other end credits scene leads nowhere and is about Lex Luthor teaming up with Deathstroke to form the Injustice League to presumably oppose the League in a planned follow-up to this film. This film, however, never had a direct sequel, so that arc never really got off the ground. I really don't have many nice things to say about Justice League, but I'll try. For one, most of the action is fairly well done. We have some cool fights with the parademons throughout the film, and up until the characters talk, I actually really dig the first encounter with Steppenwolf at the abandoned building. Good action, some real heroics, and lots of good vehicle action and character moments. Zack and Joss both knew how to work on action scenes, so I'm not sure who oversaw this portion of the film, but the action scenes mostly come out good. It was probably also largely second unit, to be honest, because that's how a lot of action films are shot, especially in these larger movies, but whatever. Speaking of fights, the fight against Superman in the Hero Park was pretty good too, and you can actually see Superman fighting a bit animalistically after coming out of his death-like state. It's actually a real solid reason to have Batman v Superman again, despite being somewhat unnecessary. The possessed hero versus the concerned hero fight is kind of a comic book trope we don't actually see much in these movies, so that's kind of cool. This isn't to say that fight is perfect. It still has some cheesy jokes undercutting the potential character drama of the scene, like when Superman calls back to Batman's "Do you bleed" line from BVS, then Batman groans and says, "Yep, I'm bleeding." It's fucking lame. Also, Lois is able to immediately turn Superman back. I know he's most emotionally attached to her, but let's add some suspense to the moment and perhaps give Superman a reaction shot to display his recognition of Lois. Small things like that would improve the scene quite a bit. This may not come as much of a surprise, but overall, I lean more into the negative than the positive when it comes to Josstice League. The film is relatively short, clocking in at 2 hours, but that just isn't enough runtime for the script outlined here. Speaking further on the script, the jokes and random non sequiturs the characters constantly spout off is annoying. For example, when Lois tells Superman he smells good, despite being reborn from being actually dead for about a year. Or Superman flipping Batman's "Do you bleed" line on him, saying,
Tell me, do you bleed?
and Batman saying, "Yup, I bleed." It's definitely not really what I think most of us wanted to see from these characters. And I just don't see a character arc that comes to this point where Batman's making all these jokes. The film even starts off on a bad note with the vertical iPhone shot of Superman, which famously had Henry Cavill's mustache digitally removed from this cut of the movie, and makes it look like a botched plastic surgery.
Used to say that hope is like your car keys. Easy to lose, but if you dig around, it's usually close by.
And while I like the first fight scene quite a bit, the follow-up leaves a lot to be desired. First of all, it's covered in a very bad red filter, which makes it incredibly visually ugly. The cityscapes are also bland, with deep muddy CGI filling out the world of this film. It's pretty unfortunate because this film had so much money put into it, costing around $300 million, that they should have attempted more in the streets in my opinion. The cityscapes should look good in superhero film. For example, Tim Burton's Batman 1989 had elaborate sets and matte paintings to fill out the world, and The Dark Knight simply used Chicago but shot it really well. There's a lot of alternative options that don't involve plastering the screen with ugly, muddy CGI, and with the film's huge budget, there's no good reason for the film to look this cheap and muddy. The climax is also unbearably red and ugly. It sort of reminds me of those shirts where the guy is motorcycling and he's like a skeleton with smoke billowing behind him and like a gun in his hand. That's just like, "You're gonna die if you mess with me, kid." That's the most apt comparison I can make up. There are also some pacing issues that feel odd. Early in the film, Bruce is on a private jet with Alfred, explaining all the characters. And it felt like the laziest way to introduce the new characters to this film. Perhaps if they wanted to go this route, put a montage with a voiceover of Bruce Wayne talking about each hero as they meet them, as Batman. Instead, the film just blandly announces each character. Marvel was successful in introducing new characters because each of the essential characters showed up in their own film, or at least as supporting characters being drip-fed in from other films. Look at Black Widow and Hawkeye. Fox's X-Men took a different route, introducing tons of characters but often using the side characters as little more than story props, with Wolverine and the core X-Men as the main characters. In a movie competing with these, this isn't a great way to introduce a fairly tight 6-person primary cast. This again feels like an editing problem more than anything. Finally, and the most glaring issue about the film, is the characters are annoying. Marvel has since dialed it back a bit, but the humor in Avengers was pretty well received for a while, so they doubled down on quips and improv to the point it seemed the improv was artificially baked into the scripts, especially starting with Joss Whedon's Age of Ultron, interestingly. Since this was the norm for Marvel's winning formula around this time, DC wanted to emulate that idea, so pretty much every dramatic moment was totally undercut with some quippy bullshit. For example,
This is home.
You smell good.
overall, I really disliked this film. Say what you will about Zack Snyder,
By the way, that version of the movie is in black and white.
but at least he had a vision and works with several frequent collaborators on most projects. What I'm trying to say is Zack Snyder is often a messy director, but he's a very real director who has visions and ideas. Some people don't. I know Joss Whedon used to kind of have stuff to say with like Buffy and Firefly, I guess, but he seemed to become a bit more of a corporate player with those Avengers films, if you know what I'm saying. In a lot of ways, I think he set a template that audiences loved for years, and now, just recently, that formula is starting to get really tired. And while Joss set up the formula that really got Marvel working post-Avengers, it was also ultimately Marvel's Achilles heel. I understand why Warner Bros. Wanted to copy the formula that the Marvel Universe had been doing for some years, especially since critically and commercially, the MCU seemed to be unbeatable. And well up to this point, the DCEU didn't do bad at the box office, the critical reception was scaring the executives, and Marvel couldn't be stopped. And Warner Brothers thought, what if we emulated what Disney was doing with our biggest characters? That's why Joss was installed in the editing room. Even before Zack left the project, the biggest issue is while tonally I think Joss's vision for Justice League would have had trouble meshing with the DC brand, you had DC trying to reform a finished film into something more akin to what Joss would have done with the film had he directed the whole thing. It ended up looking odd, having scrambled editing and adding humor that Joss might add if he created these characters but didn't work with the characters Zack created. Zack's vision, in a lot of ways, was the polar opposite of the vision and idea behind the MCU, and frankly, the MCU is more easily digestible for sure. As much as I would love to lay the blame on Joss Whedon as well, I don't really think it's his fault entirely, nor Zack's fault entirely. I think Joss was paid a hefty salary to work on this film and do it the best way he could, because that's what the studio wanted. But Zack already did so much work, it wasn't going to be an easy task for Joss to do with limited resources and a handful of reshoots. The best results would have been to let Zack make his movie, A, or B, scrap Zack's progress and let Joss Whedon make his own movie from scratch. Problem is, they wanted a new movie, but they didn't want to pay for a new movie. I would estimate a solid $200 million of production probably went to the original Snyder film before Joss even came onto the project. It was bound to be a disaster, frankly, and as much hate as Joss Whedon gets for it, I think the blame lies almost entirely with Warner Brothers. This film was a harsh overreaction to the reception of Batman v Superman, and perhaps an overreaction to box office numbers. I mean, look at some basic numbers. Avengers Age of Ultron, which came out in 2015, made $1.4 billion, and Batman v Superman made $875 million. Even with Age of Ultron costing more, I think Warner Brothers was unhappy with the film's reception and marketing in their eyes, causing the film to make around $600 million less than Avengers. Superman and Batman have also been consistent money makers now, and the Avengers were relatively the new kid on the block, basically lapping Superman and Batman's film total box office numbers. Warner's solution was easy. Grab that guy who directed Age of Ultron and just have him make a Justice League movie. The issue is, by the time they had this point of comparison, Zack was already deep into Justice League's production. I mean, say what you will about Joss, and I probably agree with everything you'll say, but I think Warner did this to themselves. I also think, while Batman v Superman kind of started the fire to kill the universe, that was kind of a small fire, so to speak, and pretty easily could have been put out had Warner Brothers decided to weather the storm. Warner Bros. Lined the walls of the DCEU with thermite, so to speak, and it became deadly. I originally listed some directors I think they could have poached from Marvel that I think would have been a better option, like Shane Black or the Russos. And that might have been true, and while they could have perhaps meshed with Zack Snyder's style better, I don't think it would have been the right save either. I think what they should have done is the Michael Bay Transformers technique. I just kind of talked about the Transformers movies. That man was making billion-dollar Transformers movies for 10 years. He did 5 of them. None of them have solid Rotten Tomato scores, and nobody gave a fuck. They just wanted to watch the movies. So just weather out Justice League, just let Zack finish Justice League, promote the movie, probably make okay money, cost a hell of a lot less than they ended up spending, because they almost put another $100 million into the movie, bad Joss Whedon, and then just take another L, get the low critical percentage. I mean, that's just kind of how it goes with Zack Snyder, and then just find someone else to keep doing the DCEU. Alternatively, try to find someone a little closer to Zack who might be able to complete his image, like Christopher Nolan or something. Justice League made $658 million off of a budget of $300 million, netting Warner Brothers around $50 to $150 million in gross profit if I had to guess, making it probably the first DC box office disappointment. Critically, it fared pretty poorly as well, with a 39% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 45 out of 100 on Metacritic. Another pretty poor critical reception, but not as low as Suicide Squad or even Batman v Superman. People called the movie messy and bombastic, but not that complex, fun, or special. More critical reviews called it out for basically being the problem with the superhero genre and comparing it unfavorably to Marvel's Avengers, a film that came out 5 years earlier. The film was nominated for a handful of awards, from things like the Kids' Choice Awards, but it didn't win any awards. Whatsoever. None of them. Not one. Not even the Kids' Choice Award. They couldn't lock that down. The poor reception of this film mixed with the declined box office yield slowed the plans for producing a second film, which would eventually never happen.